Jake Morrison looked out through the massive windows of Harmony Prime Station. The view showed two bright stars spinning around each other in an endless dance. Around them, ships from 47 different worlds floated in perfect formation. Each ship was different. Some looked like giant crystals. Others were dark and spiky. A few seemed to be made of living metal that moved and flowed. Jake had seen many alien ships before, but never this many in one place. He was Earth's chief diplomat, and he had been to dozens of meetings with other species. But this was different. This was the biggest peace summit in the history of the galaxy. Lisa Kane stood next to him, making notes on her tablet. She was Earth's cultural expert, and she studied how different alien species behaved. Her job was to help Jake understand what the aliens really meant when they spoke. "The Saurian ship just arrived," Lisa said, pointing to a long, dark vessel that looked like a giant snake. "That's Commander Zexthai's flagship. He's been fighting wars for over 200 years. Jake nodded. He had read about Commander Zexthai. The reptilian warrior had conquered 12 star systems and had never lost a battle. His people, the Saurians, were known throughout the galaxy as fierce fighters who never gave up. "And there's the Althery vessel," Lisa added, indicating a ship that looked like it was made of pure crystal. "High Counselor Velinara is supposed to be over 1,000 years old. Her people can live forever if they want to." The Althery were strange beings, made of living crystal. They could think as one mind when they needed to, sharing thoughts across their entire species. They had been watching the galaxy for thousands of years, rarely getting involved in wars, but always keeping careful records of everything that happened. Jake adjusted his simple black suit. He looked very ordinary compared to the alien delegates who were arriving at the station. Most of them wore elaborate armor or ceremonial robes that showed their military ranks and battle honors. Jake wore the same kind of suit he might wear to a business meeting back on Earth. "Sir," said a voice behind them. Jake turned to see Lieutenant Commander Pete Walsh, the only person with military rank in Earth's entire delegation. But Pete wasn't really military anymore. He worked for the diplomatic corps now, handling security and logistics. "The opening ceremony is about to begin," Pete said. "The other delegations are already gathering in the main hall." Jake and Lisa followed Pete through the station's corridors. The walls were made of a smooth, white material that seemed to glow with its own light. Alien symbols floated in the air, translating themselves into different languages as different species walked by. The main hall was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into darkness. Floating platforms held the delegations from each world. Each platform was designed to meet the needs of different species. Some had thick atmospheres for beings who breathed methane. Others had intense gravity for creatures who were used to heavy worlds. Earth's platform was simple and clean. It had normal gravity and breathable air. There were just 12 humans on it, all wearing similar dark suits. Compared to other delegations, they looked very small and plain. On the platform next to theirs, the Krex Confederation had brought over 50 delegates. They were tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and sharp teeth. Every one of them wore battle armor and carried weapons. Their leader, War Chief Gregtor, had scars covering his face and arms from dozens of battles. "Look at the humans," War Chief Gregtor said to his officers, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "They bring scientists and negotiators to a peace summit. Where are their warriors? Where are their generals?" Several other alien delegates turned to look at Earth's platform. Jake could hear them whispering among themselves. The words were translated into English by the station's computers. "Do humans even have a military?" asked a delegate from the Vorthan Empire. "Maybe they're too weak to fight," suggested someone from the Helix Syndicate. Commander Zexthai slithered over to the edge of his platform. His snake-like body was covered in dark scales, and his yellow eyes fixed on Jake Morrison. "Human diplomat," he called out, his voice carrying across the hall. "I have studied your species. You have been in space for less than 400 years. You have fought no major wars against other species. How can you speak for peace when you do not understand?" "War?" The hall grew quiet. Hundreds of alien eyes turned toward Earth's platform. Jake felt the weight of their attention. He stood up slowly and walked to the edge of his platform. "Commander Zexthai," Jake said, his voice calm and steady. "We understand war very well, perhaps better than most species here." "Then where are your warriors?" War Chief Greater demanded. "Every other species has sent their military leaders. The Aldari brought their battle minds. The Ethereals sent their death speakers. Even the peaceful gentlefolk brought their protector caste. Where Earth's generals?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. Lisa could see something in his eyes that made her nervous. It was the same look he got when he was about to say something that would change everything. "Our military serves a different purpose," Jake said finally. The alien delegates looked at each other, confused. High Counselor Velinara, the ancient crystal being, spoke in a voice like ringing bells. "What purpose could be more important than ensuring peace through strength?" "Our military doesn't do peace," Jake replied. "They do something else entirely." War Chief Greater laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the hall. "Your military is too weak to attend a simple diplomatic meeting? Perhaps humans are not ready to sit at the table with real civilizations." Other delegates began to murmur agreement. Jake could see them losing respect for humanity. Some were already turning away, dismissing Earth as unimportant, but Lisa was watching Jake's face. She had worked with him for 10 years, and she knew him well. He wasn't angry or upset by the insults. Instead, he looked almost sad. It was the expression of someone who knew a terrible secret that he couldn't share. Chief Diplomat Morrison called out a new voice. It belonged to Ambassador Korth from the Thelian Republic. Korth was an old warrior who had fought in more battles than most species could count. His body was covered in scars, and he walked with a limp from an old wound. "I mean no disrespect, but the other delegates raise a valid point. How can we trust a species that won't show us their strength?" Jake looked at Ambassador Korth for a long moment. There was something like respect in his eyes. "Ambassador Korth, your people have fought valiantly for over 1,000 years. You understand the cost of war better than most." "I do," Korth replied. "That's why I wonder about a species that seems to avoid it entirely." "We don't avoid war," Jake said quietly. "We just don't bring it to peace talks." The ceremony began before anyone could ask what he meant. High Counselor Velinara rose from her crystal throne and began to speak about the history of galactic conflict. Her words were beautiful and ancient, talking about the millions of lives lost in the wars between species. But Lisa wasn't listening to the speech. She was thinking about Jake's words and the look in his eyes. She had a feeling that the other delegates had no idea what they were dealing with when it came to humanity. As the ceremony continued, she noticed something else. Every few minutes, Jake would check a small device on his wrist. It looked like a simple watch, but Lisa knew it was connected to Earth's deep space communication network. Whatever messages Jake was receiving, they weren't making him happy. If anything, he looked more concerned as the day went on. The other delegates continued to whisper about humanity's weakness. They had no idea that their biggest mistake was thinking that the humans at the Peace Summit represented everything humanity had to offer. They would learn soon enough how wrong they were. The dining hall of Harmony Prime was designed to accommodate dozens of different species. Tables floated at various heights, some in pools of liquid methane, others in chambers filled with thick orange gas. The human section was simple and plain, with regular tables and chairs that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate setups around them. Lisa Kane sat across from Ambassador Korth at one of these simple tables. The old Thalian warrior had approached her after the opening ceremony, curious about the humans who seemed so different from every other species at the summit. Ambassador Korth was an impressive figure, even sitting down. His skin was thick and gray, covered in scars from dozens of battles. One of his forearms was mechanical, replaced after he lost the original in a war 300 years ago. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, but there was a weariness in them that spoke of many years of fighting. Your people interest me, Korth said, carefully cutting his food with his mechanical arm. In all my years of warfare, I have never encountered a species that sends only diplomats to a peace summit. Lisa smiled politely. We believe that peace is too important to be left to soldiers. Korth's scarred face showed confusion. But how? Can you make peace without understanding war? On my world, we say that only those who have tasted blood can truly value peace. Dr. Helen Price, who had been quietly eating at the next table, looked up from her meal. She was Earth's military historian, a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes. But when she spoke about warfare, her voice carried the weight of someone who had studied humanity's darkest chapters. Ambassador Korth, Dr. Price said, moving to join their table. Perhaps you would be interested in learning about human military history. Korth's eyes brightened. Very much so. I have heard rumors, but nothing concrete. Tell me, Doctor, what was your greatest battle? Dr. Price was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. We call it the Great War, though it was actually the second of 2 global conflicts. It lasted 6 years and involved every major nation on our planet. Impressive, Korth said, though he didn't sound particularly impressed. 6 years is a respectable length for a planetary war. How many warriors did you lose? 60 million. Dr. Price said quietly. Korth nearly choked on his food. 60 million? In one war? Actually, that was just the military casualties, Dr. Price continued. Total deaths, including civilians, were around 75 million. The old warrior stared at her. 75 million beings died in a single conflict? That's impossible. No planet has that many people. Lisa and Dr. Price exchanged glances. Ambassador, Lisa said gently, Earth's current population is approximately 12 billion. Korth's mechanical arm stopped moving. 12 billion? That's more than the entire population of the Thalian Republic. Our planet is quite crowded, Dr. Price said. But that's not unusual for us. We've always had large populations. Even during our early wars, we were fighting with armies of millions. Tell me about these early wars, Korth said, leaning forward. His warrior's instincts were engaged now. What were your tactics? How did you organize such massive forces? Dr. Price looked uncomfortable. Ambassador, I'm not sure this is appropriate dinner conversation. Please, Korth insisted. I have fought in wars across a dozen star systems. I have seen every form of combat imaginable. I am not easily disturbed, Dr. Price sighed. Very well. But remember, you asked for this. She began with humanity's ancient history, describing the wars of the Roman Empire, the conquests of Alexander the Great, and the battles of medieval Europe. Korth listened with growing interest as she explained how humans had developed complex military formations, siege warfare, and coordinated cavalry charges. Fascinating, Korth said. Your species learned to fight in organized formations very early. Most species take centuries to develop such coordination. That was just the beginning, Dr. Price said. Then we developed gunpowder. She described the changes that came with firearms, how warfare became more deadly and more impersonal. Korth nodded along, familiar with similar developments in other species' histories. But then Dr. Price began talking about the Industrial Revolution and how it changed human warfare. She described factories that could produce thousands of weapons in a single day, railroads that could move entire armies across continents, and the development of chemical weapons that could kill thousands of soldiers in minutes. Korth's expression began to change. Chemical weapons? You poisoned your enemies? Among other things, Dr. Price said. We also developed machine guns that could fire hundreds of bullets per minute, artillery that could destroy entire cities, and aircraft that could drop bombs from the sky. But surely these weapons were too terrible to use, Korth said. Number. Civilized species would actually employ such methods. Dr. Price shook her head. We used all of them. The first global war killed nearly 20 million people. We used poison gas, machine guns, and artillery that could be heard from 100 miles away. Entire battles were fought where hundreds of thousands of soldiers died in a single day. Korth was quiet for a long moment. And then you fought another war? 20 years later, Dr. Price confirmed. The Second Global War was even worse. We had developed better weapons by then. Rockets that could level entire city blocks, aircraft that could carry tons of explosives, and submarines that could sink ships from miles away. The casualties you mentioned, Korth said slowly, 75 million deaths. That was all from improved weapons? Partly, Dr. Price said. But the real difference was the scale. In the Second Global War, we didn't just fight with armies. We mobilized entire populations. Every factory, every farm, every resource on the planet was dedicated to the war effort. We call it total war. Korth's forearms were trembling slightly. Total war? The complete mobilization of society for military purposes, Dr. Price explained. Civilian targets became military targets. Cities were bombed not just to destroy factories, but to break the enemy's will to fight. We developed weapons specifically, designed to kill as many people as possible. And this was before you had space travel? Korth asked. Long before, Dr. Price said. We didn't reach other planets until more than a century later. All of these wars were fought on a single world between members of the same species. Korth stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're telling me that humans regularly fought wars that killed more people than live on most planets, and you did this while confined to a single world? Multiple times, Dr. Price said. The two global wars were just the largest. We had hundreds of smaller conflicts, many of which killed millions of people. But why? Korth demanded. What could possibly drive a species to such extremes? Lisa spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Resources, territory, religion, politics. Sometimes we fought just because we couldn't agree on how to organize our societies. Korth sank back into his chair. On Thalia, we have fought wars for 1,000 years. Our greatest battle killed 50,000 warriors. We built monuments to remember such a terrible day. But you speak of millions of deaths as if they were routine. They were routine, Dr. Price said sadly. The 20th century alone saw over 100 million deaths from warfare. That's not counting disease, famine, or other disasters caused by the fighting. And your military leaders? Korth asked. The ones who planned these campaigns? Many of them are remembered as heroes, Dr. Price said. We built statues of the generals who won our greatest victories. We named schools and streets after them. Korth was quiet for a long time, staring at his food. Finally, he looked up at the two human women. I begin to understand why your military leaders don't attend peace summits. Do you? Lisa asked. A species that can kill 100 million of its own kind in a single century, Korth said slowly, would have very different ideas about warfare than the rest of us. Double quotes. Dr. Price nodded. Our military thinks in terms that most species can't understand. When we plan for war, we plan for the complete destruction of the enemy's ability to fight. Not just their armies, but their factories, their transportation, their communication systems, their economy, their government. Everything, Korth said. Everything, Dr. Price confirmed. Korth stood up again, but this time his movements were slower, more careful. I think I need to speak with some of the other delegates. This changes things. As he walked away, Lisa could see him moving from table to table, speaking quietly with other military leaders. Word was spreading through the dining hall. The conversations were becoming more subdued, more serious. Did we just make a mistake? Lisa asked Dr. Price. I don't know, the historian replied. But they needed to understand what they're dealing with. Better they learn now than later. Across the hall, more and more alien delegates were turning to look at the human tables. But the expressions on their faces had changed. They no longer looked curious or dismissive. They looked worried. Roy Blake had hoped to avoid conversations about military matters entirely. He was officially listed as a security consultant for Earth's diplomatic mission, but that title didn't tell the whole story. Blake had spent 20 years in Earth's Special Forces before transitioning to diplomatic security. He preferred to keep that background quiet. Unfortunately, word had spread through the station about humanity's violent history. Now every military leader at the summit wanted to talk to the humans about warfare. Blake found himself cornered in one of the station's observation lounges by Counselor Thex, the supreme military commander of the Chithri swarm. Counselor Thex was not someone Blake wanted to have this conversation with. The Chithri were insectoid beings who resembled giant praying mantises, with razor-sharp claws and compound eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously. They were known throughout the galaxy for their swarm tactics and their ability to reproduce rapidly during wartime. Human Blake, Counselor Thex said, his voice creating a buzzing sound that made Blake's teeth ache. I have heard interesting stories about your species' military capabilities. I would like to compare notes. Blake tried to politely decline, but Counselor Thex was persistent. Eventually, Blake realized that refusing to talk would only make the aliens more curious. Maybe it was better to have a controlled conversation with one military leader than to let rumors spread unchecked. What would you like to know, Counselor? Blake asked, settling into one of the lounge's chairs. Counselor. Thex's compound eyes fixed on him. Your people fought wars with millions of casualties, yes? This is impressive, but I wonder about your tactics. The Chithri have perfected the art of overwhelming force. When we attack, we send billions of warriors. No enemy can stand against such numbers. Blake nodded politely. That's certainly one approach to warfare. It is the only approach that matters, Counselor Thex said confidently. Superior numbers always win. This is a fundamental law of military science. Is it? Blake asked. Of course. How else would you defeat an enemy? You cannot win if you are outnumbered. Blake was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Afghanistan, Vietnam, and dozens of other conflicts where smaller forces had defeated larger ones. Counselor, has your species ever fought an enemy that used guerrilla tactics? Guerrilla? I do not know this word. Small groups of fighters who avoid direct confrontation, Blake explained. They attack supply lines, communication systems, and isolated outposts. They blend in with civilian populations. They strike when the enemy is weak and disappear when the enemy is strong. Counselor Thex's mandibles clicked dismissively. Such tactics are cowardly. Real warriors fight in open battle. But do they work? Blake asked. How could they work against superior numbers? Blake leaned back in his chair. Let me tell you about a war my people fought. We call it the Vietnam War. A small, poor country fought against the most powerful military in the world at that time. The powerful military had better weapons, more soldiers, and complete control of the air and sea. And they won quickly, yes? They lost, Blake said simply. Counselor Thex's compound eyes blinked rapidly. Impossible. The smaller force used guerrilla tactics for 20 years. They made the war so expensive and difficult that the larger force eventually gave up and went home. But the superior numbers, don't always matter, Blake finished. Human military doctrine has evolved to assume that we'll usually be outnumbered. We plan for it. How? Blake hesitated. This was getting into territory he really didn't want to discuss. But Counselor Thex was leaning forward, genuinely interested in learning. We study the enemy's weaknesses, Blake said finally. Every military force has vulnerabilities. Supply lines that can be cut, communication systems that can be disrupted, leaders that can be eliminated, morale that can be broken. You target non-combatants? We target whatever wins the war, Blake said. If an enemy depends on a particular factory, we destroy the factory. If they depend on a specific transportation route, we cut the route. If they depend on the loyalty of their population, we find ways to turn the population against them. Counselor Thex was very still. You fight the entire enemy society, not just their military. Sometimes. It depends on what's necessary to achieve victory. And if the enemy does the same to you? Blake's expression hardened. Then we escalate. Escalate? We make the cost of fighting us higher than the cost of surrendering to us. Always. Counselor Thex stood up and began pacing around the lounge. His claws clicked against the floor with each step. This is not how civilized species conduct warfare. Probably not, Blake agreed. There are rules, conventions, standards of behavior that all military forces follow. We follow them too when we can. But if the enemy breaks the rules first, you break them harder, Counselor Thex finished. We do whatever it takes to win, Blake confirmed. Human military philosophy is simple. The only acceptable outcome of warfare is complete victory. But surely there are limits, things you would not do. Blake was quiet for a long time. Counselor, in our second global war, we developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single explosion. We used them. On military targets? On cities full of civilians. Counselor Thex stopped pacing. Why? To end the war faster. We calculated that killing a few 100,000 people immediately would save millions of lives in the long run. And did it work? The enemy surrendered within days. Counselor Thex's compound eyes were focused entirely on Blake now. You speak of these things very calmly. I'm a soldier, Blake said. This is what soldiers do. We calculate the most efficient way to achieve victory, and then we execute that plan. Even if it means destroying cities? Especially if it means destroying cities. Urban warfare is complicated and costly. It's much more efficient to destroy a city from a distance than to fight for it street by street. You have thought about this extensively. Every human military officer has thought about this extensively. We study warfare the way other species study art or philosophy. We analyze every battle, every campaign, every war in our history. We learn from our mistakes and we improve our methods. Counselor Thex sat down again, but he seemed smaller somehow. How many human military officers are there? Blake hesitated again. This was definitely information he shouldn't share. But the conversation had already gone too far to stop now. Currently, about 50 million active duty officers. Another 100 million reserve officers who can be called up if needed. 50 million officers? Counselor Thex's voice rose to a higher pitch. How many total military personnel do you have? That's classified, Blake said. Approximately. Blake sighed. Approximately 2 billion active duty personnel. Another billion in reserves. Counselor Thex was very still for a long moment. 3 billion military personnel? Give or take. Out of how many total humans? About 12 billion. 1 in 4 humans is a soldier? 1 in 4 humans is a trained soldier, Blake corrected. All humans receive basic military training. In school, in a real emergency, we could mobilize our entire adult population. Your entire population is your military? If necessary, yes. Counselor Thex stood up abruptly. I need to speak with my advisors. As the insectoid commander hurried away, Blake realized that he had probably said too much. But maybe that was for the best. If the aliens were going to make assumptions about humanity, it was better that they made the right assumptions. A few. Minutes later, Jake Morrison entered the lounge. He looked tired and worried. Roy, we need to talk, Jake said, sitting down across from him. About what? About the messages I've been receiving from Earth. Jake showed him his wrist device. Fleet Command wants to know if they should move our deep space forces into position. Position for what? In case these peace talks fail, Jake said. They're concerned that the other species might try to form an alliance against us. Blake looked out through the lounge's windows at the alien ships surrounding the station. How concerned? Concerned enough to have Admiral Murphy standing by with the First Fleet. Blake knew about Admiral Murphy. The man was brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to protecting Earth at any cost. If Murphy was getting involved, the situation was more serious than Blake had realized. What did you tell Fleet Command? Blake asked. I told them to stand down for now, Jake said. But Roy, if these talks go badly, we might not have a choice. About bringing our military into this, Blake nodded. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do anymore. These aliens have no idea what they're dealing with. And I'm starting to think that maybe that's the way it should stay. Outside the windows, more alien ships continued to arrive. But Blake was no longer thinking about the peace summit. He was thinking about the human fleets that were undoubtedly watching from just outside sensor range, waiting for orders that he hoped would never come. High Marshal Kinder of the Ethereal Dominion was not used to being ignored. As the supreme military commander of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, he expected other species to show proper deference to his rank and experience. The humans, however, seemed completely unimpressed by his presence. This bothered him more than he cared to admit. The Ethereals were energy beings who had transcended physical form millions of years ago. They appeared as shimmering columns of light, speaking in harmonious tones that could inspire or terrify, depending on their mood. High Marshal Quinder had commanded fleets that conquered entire star systems, and his strategic brilliance was legendary throughout the galaxy. But the humans treated him like any other delegate. Director Stone, High Marshal Quinder said, approaching. The head of Earth's Department of Xenological Affairs. His voice resonated with power and authority. I demand an explanation for your species' disrespectful behavior. Director Paul Stone looked up from his conversation with Lisa Kane. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. Like most of the human delegates, he wore a simple black suit that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial gear worn by other species. I'm sorry, High Marshal, Stone said politely. What behavior are you referring to? Your refusal to acknowledge military hierarchy, Quinder replied, his light form pulsing with indignation. Every other species at this summit has shown proper respect for rank and combat experience. Your people act as if military service means nothing. Stone exchanged glances with Lisa Kane. High Marshal, we respect military service very much. We simply believe that peace negotiations should be handled by civilians. Impossible, Quinder said. How can civilians understand the realities of warfare? How can they negotiate from a position of strength without military backing? We have military backing, Stone said quietly. Where? Quinder's form flared brighter. I see no human warships in the fleet formation outside. I see no military commanders in your delegation. Your species appears to have no significant military presence at all. Jake Morrison, who had been listening to the conversation, stood up from his chair. His wrist device had been beeping steadily for the past hour, indicating incoming priority messages from Earth. High Marshal, Jake said. Perhaps it would help if you understood why our military isn't here. Yes, Quinder replied. I would very much like to understand that. Jake touched his wrist device, and a holographic display appeared in the air above the table. It showed a star chart of local space, with various symbols indicating different types of ships and installations. This is our current situation, Jake said. High Marshal Quinder studied the display. At first, he saw only the expected elements: the Peace Summit Station, the assembled alien fleets, and the normal background traffic of interstellar commerce. Then he began to notice other symbols on the chart, small markers that indicated military vessels positioned throughout the system. As he studied them more carefully, he realized there were far more than he had initially noticed. These symbols, Quinder said slowly. What do they represent? Human military assets, Jake replied. But there are dozens of them. Hundreds, actually, Jake corrected. The display only shows ships above a certain size threshold. Quinder's light form flickered with confusion. You said your military wasn't present at this summit. I said. They weren't attending the negotiations, Jake clarified. They're definitely present in the system. Director Stone touched the holographic controls, and the display zoomed out to show a wider area of space. More symbols appeared, scattered throughout multiple star systems. Our nearest fleet base is 3 light years from here, Stone explained. Admiral Murphy is currently conducting training exercises with the First Fleet in that sector. Training exercises? Quinder asked. Planetary assault scenarios, mainly, Stone said casually. They're practicing coordinated attacks on heavily defended worlds. Standard drill. High Marshal Quinder stared at the display. The symbols representing the human training exercises covered an area larger than most interstellar wars he had witnessed. How many personnel are involved in this training exercise? Quinder asked. Admiral Murphy's fleet currently has about 200 million active crew members, Stone replied, plus another 50 million support personnel on the logistics. Ships. 250 million people in a single fleet? That's actually smaller than our usual fleet strength, Jake said. Admiral Murphy is operating at about 70% capacity for these exercises. High Marshal Quinder's energy form began to flicker erratically. Your usual fleet strength is larger than the total population of most civilizations. Our military is somewhat larger than average, Stone admitted. A new voice joined the conversation. Colonel Sam Carter appeared on a secure holographic communication link, her image materializing next to Jake's wrist device. She was a stern-looking woman in a crisp military uniform, speaking from what appeared to be a command center deep underground. Director Stone, Colonel Carter said, I'm calling to update you on Fleet Command's current status. We've detected increased chatter from several alien military networks. Intelligence suggests that some species are considering forming a coalition against Earth. A coalition for what purpose? Stone asked. Unknown, but the communications patterns suggest military planning. Admiral Murphy has requested permission to move to Condition Yellow. Jake looked troubled. What's Condition Yellow? Enhanced readiness posture, Colonel Carter explained. All fleets move to forward positions. Planetary defenses activate. Reserve forces begin mobilization. How many reserve forces? High Marshal Quinder asked, unable to stop himself. Colonel Carter looked at him with surprise. I wasn't aware we were discussing classified information. with alien delegates. The High Marshal is concerned about our military capabilities, Stone said diplomatically. Our current reserve strength is approximately 1.2 billion personnel. Colonel Carter said after a moment's hesitation. They can be fully mobilized within 72 hours. High Marshal Quinder's light form dimmed significantly. 1.2 billion reserves? In addition to your active forces? Yes, sir, Colonel Carter replied. Plus civilian auxiliaries and planetary militias, but those aren't technically part of our military structure. How many civilian auxiliaries? Quinder asked weakly. Every human adult receives basic military training, Colonel Carter said. In a true emergency, we could mobilize approximately 8 billion additional personnel. 8 billion? Our entire adult population, essentially, Colonel Carter confirmed. Children begin military training at age 12, so even our youngest citizens have some combat capability. Jake's wrist device beeped with another urgent message. He read it quickly, and his face grew pale. Colonel Carter, Jake said, I'm looking at a message from Admiral Murphy. He's requesting permission to begin what he calls demonstration maneuvers near the summit station. What kind of demonstrations? Stone asked. Fleet formations designed to be visible to alien sensors, Colonel Carter replied. Admiral Murphy believes that some species at the summit are underestimating Earth's military strength. He wants to correct that misunderstanding. How visible would these demonstrations be? Jake asked. Admiral Murphy is proposing to move approximately 5,000 ships to positions within 1 light hour of Harmony Prime Station, Colonel Carter said. The formations would be impossible to miss on any military sensor array. High Marshal Quinder made a sound like static electricity. 5,000 ships as a demonstration? Admiral Murphy believes in making clear statements, Colonel Carter said. Colonel, Stone said, what's Admiral Murphy's assessment of the current situation? He believes that several alien species are planning either a direct attack on the Fate Summit or a coordinated action against Earth immediately following the peace negotiations, Colonel Carter replied. His recommendation is to remind them that such actions would be inadvisable. And if they proceed anyway? Colonel Carter was quiet for a moment. Admiral Murphy's standing orders are to protect Earth's interests by any means necessary. If he determines that Earth is under threat, he has full authorization to respond appropriately. What does appropriately mean in this context? High Marshal Quinder asked. Complete elimination of the threat, Colonel Carter said simply. Admiral Murphy doesn't believe in limited engagements or proportional responses. If someone attacks Earth, he removes their ability to ever attack anyone again. Jake made a decision. Colonel Carter, please inform Admiral Murphy that he does not have permission for demonstration maneuvers at this time. We're still attempting to resolve this situation diplomatically. Understood, sir, Colonel Carter replied. But I should inform you that Admiral Murphy is not the only fleet commander monitoring this situation. Admiral Chun has moved the second fleet to a support position, and Admiral Rodriguez is bringing the third fleet out of deep space patrol. 3 fleets? Stone asked. Fleet Command considers this summit to be strategically critical, Colonel Carter explained. They're taking no chances with Earth's security. As Colonel Carter's image faded, High Marshal Quinder found himself staring at the holographic star chart that still showed human military positions. The scale of what he was seeing was beyond his comprehension. Director Stone. The peace summit was falling apart. After 3 days of negotiations, several species had threatened to withdraw entirely. The Krex Confederation refused to sign any treaty that included humans. The Saurian Empire demanded military guarantees that Earth couldn't provide without revealing the true size of their forces. The Chithari swarm had become increasingly agitated since Counselor Thex's conversation with Roy Blake. Jake Morrison stood in the main conference hall, watching as decades of diplomatic work crumbled before his eyes. Representatives from 47 civilizations argued loudly in dozens of different languages, their voices creating a chaos that the station's translation systems could barely handle. "This is a disaster," Lisa Kane said, approaching Jake with a grim expression. "Half the delegates are convinced we're too weak to be useful allies. The other half think we're too dangerous to be trusted." "Maybe they're both right," Jake replied, checking his wrist device. The messages from Earth were becoming more urgent by the hour. Dr. Helen Price joined them, looking tired and worried. "I've been monitoring the alien communication networks. Several species are definitely planning some kind of coordinated action against Earth." "What kind of action?" Jake asked. "Economic sanctions at minimum. Military action if they can build enough support for it." Jake's device beeped with an incoming priority transmission. The holographic image of President Maria Santos appeared, looking calm despite the chaos surrounding the peace summit. "Jake," President Santos said, "I'm calling to inform you that I'll be addressing the summit personally in 30 minutes. "Madam President, I'm not sure that's advisable," Jake replied. "The situation here is extremely volatile." "Which is exactly why I need to speak with them," President Santos said. "The delegates need to understand what they're dealing with before they make any irreversible decisions." "What are you planning to tell them?" "The truth," President Santos said simply. "All of it." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Madam President, are you sure that's wise?" "Jake, I've been watching the reports from your team. These alien leaders have no idea what humanity really is. They're making decisions based on incomplete information, and that's dangerous for everyone involved. But if we reveal everything ... then they'll finally understand why our military doesn't attend peace summits." President Santos said, "Better they learn now than later." The transmission ended, leaving Jake staring at the empty air where the president's image had been. Around him, the alien delegates continued their heated arguments, unaware that everything was about to change. 30 minutes later, President Santos's holographic image appeared in the center of the main hall. The arguing gradually died down as the delegates realized that Earth's highest leader was addressing them directly. President Santos was a small woman, with silver hair and kind eyes, but when she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. She looked around the hall, making eye contact with each delegation in turn. "Honored delegates," President Santos began, "I understand that there has been considerable confusion about humanity's approach to these peace negotiations. Some of you question our commitment to galactic security because we haven't brought military representatives. Others worry about our capabilities because our forces aren't visible. I'm here to clear up these misunderstandings." War Chief Gregtor of the Krex Confederation stood up aggressively. "President Santos, your species has shown nothing but weakness at this summit. You send diplomats and scientists to discuss matters of war and peace. How can we trust allies who won't show their strength?" "An excellent question," President Santos replied calmly. "The answer is simple. We don't bring our military to peace summits because peace negotiations are not military operations. All negotiations are backed by military force," High Marshal Quinder declared. "This is a fundamental principle of diplomacy." "For most species, yes," President Santos agreed. "But humanity operates differently. Our military serves a very specific purpose, and that purpose has nothing to do with diplomacy." Commander Zek's thigh slithered forward on his platform. "Then what is your military's purpose?" President Santos was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Our military exists to fight wars, nothing else. They don't negotiate, they don't compromise, and they don't engage in limited conflicts. When we deploy our military forces, it's because we've decided that something needs to be completely destroyed." "Surely you engage in defensive operations," Ambassador Korth said. "Limited conflicts to protect your interests." We don't do limited conflicts, President Santos replied. Human military doctrine is based on a simple principle. If something is worth fighting for, it's worth destroying your enemies completely to get it. A murmur of unease rippled through the hall. Counselor Lex clicked his mandibles nervously. You speak of total warfare as if it's normal. For us, it is normal, President Santos said. When humans fight, we fight until the enemy surrenders, unconditionally, or ceases to exist as a functioning civilization. There are no other acceptable outcomes. High Marshal Quinder's light form flickered rapidly. But surely your military leaders understand restraint, proportional response, rules of engagement. President Santos shook her head. Our military leaders understand one thing: victory. Complete, total, absolute victory. Everything else is a civilian concern. She gestured, and a new holographic image appeared in the hall. It showed Fleet Admiral John Murphy, a stern-looking man in a crisp military uniform, standing on the bridge of what appeared to be a massive warship. This is Fleet Admiral Murphy, President Santos said. He commands our first fleet, which is currently conducting training exercises 3 light years from this station. Admiral, would you please explain to the delegates why you don't attend peace summits? Admiral Murphy's cold eyes swept across the assembled aliens. When he spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. I don't attend peace summits because peace is not my job. My job is to identify threats to Earth and eliminate them completely. What do you mean by eliminate completely? War Chief Gregtor demanded. I mean that when I'm finished with an enemy, they no longer have the ability to threaten anyone ever again, Admiral Murphy replied. Their military is destroyed. Their government is destroyed. Their industrial capacity is destroyed. Their ability to wage war is permanently eliminated. That's genocide, Ambassador Korth said quietly. That's victory, Admiral Murphy corrected. Anything less is just postponing the next war. President Santos nodded. This is why our military leaders don't attend diplomatic functions. Their presence would be interpreted as a threat, because it would be a threat. If Admiral Murphy were sitting at this table, every species here would be a potential target for assessment and elimination planning. You keep your military leaders away from diplomacy to protect us? High Counselor Velinara asked, her crystal voice ringing with surprise. We keep them away to protect everyone, President Santos confirmed, including ourselves. Our military thinks in terms that most species can't understand. To them, this peace summit would look like a gathering of potential enemies in one convenient location. Admiral Murphy's image leaned forward slightly. If I were attending this summit, I would already have detailed plans for eliminating every military force represented here. Not because I want to fight you, but because that's what I do. I plan for victory in every possible scenario. Even against allies? Commander Zexthai asked. Especially against allies, Admiral Murphy replied. Today's ally can become tomorrow's enemy. I prepare for every possibility. The hall was completely silent now. The alien delegates were beginning to understand something that terrified them. Admiral Murphy, High Marshal Quinder said slowly, how would you handle a species that posed a threat to Earth? Complete elimination of their ability to threaten anyone, Admiral Murphy said without hesitation. I would destroy their fleets, occupy their worlds, and dismantle their civilization until they could never again pose a threat to Earth or anyone else. And if they surrendered, I would accept their surrender and then ensure they could never fight again. President Santos looked around the hall at the shocked faces of the alien delegates. This is why humanity's military doesn't attend peace summits. They don't understand concepts like limited war, proportional response, or negotiated settlements. They understand only total victory and total defeat. But surely they follow orders from civilian leadership, Ambassador Korth said desperately. Of course they do, President Santos replied. But their orders are simple: protect Earth and eliminate threats. How they accomplish those objectives is left to their professional judgment. Admiral Murphy's image nodded. The President tells me what needs to be protected and what constitutes a threat. I determine the most efficient way to eliminate that threat permanently. What about rules of engagement? High Marshal Quinder asked. Win, Admiral Murphy said simply. That's the only rule that matters. War Chief Gregor had been quiet for several minutes, but now he stood up again. President Santos, are you threatening us? Quite the opposite, President Santos replied. I'm explaining why we don't threaten anyone. Our military is too dangerous to use for diplomacy or political pressure. They're only deployed when we've decided that something needs to be completely destroyed. Then why maintain such enormous forces? Counselor,